The rain in New York City was not just a drizzle, it was a heavy, relentless curtain that soaked through umbrellas and turned the sidewalks into reflective mirrors of the streetlights. It was the kind of night that made everyone want to stay indoors, ordering delivery and watching movies, but for Keanu Reeves, the weather was actually a blessing. It kept people indoors. It lowered the number of cameras pointed in his direction. It gave him a rare slice of anonymity in a city that rarely slept and rarely forgot a famous face. Keanu pulled the collar of his worn-out leather jacket up higher around his neck, ducking his head as he stepped out of a black SUV that had dropped him off a block away from his destination. He didn't have a bodyguard with him tonight. He rarely did when he was just trying to be a regular person. He loved his job, the acting, and the motorcycles, but sometimes the noise of being Keanu Reeves was exhausting. Tonight, he just wanted a plate of pasta and a glass of wine, away from the flashing lights. He found the small Italian bistro tucked away on a quiet street corner. It wasn't one of those trendy places where people went to be seen, it was a family-run spot with red checkered tablecloths and the smell of garlic and oregano hanging thick in the warm air. When Keanu opened the heavy wooden door, the bell above it jingled, a cheerful sound that contrasted with the gloomy weather outside. He shook off his wet umbrella and scanned the room. The host, an older man with a mustache, recognized him immediately but, to Keanu's relief, simply nodded and guided him to a small booth in the back corner. It was perfect. He could see the room but was partially hidden in the shadows. He sat down and let out a long breath he felt like he'd been holding all day. He picked up the menu, though he already knew what he wanted. As he waited for the waiter, he did what he always did, he watched people. It was an actor's habit, observing the small details of how humans behaved. There was a group of loud students laughing by the window, a couple on a first date looking nervous and awkward, and then, there was them. An elderly couple had just come in from the rain, shaking off their wet coats. They looked to be in their late 70s or maybe early 80s. The man, tall but slightly stooped, held the door open for the woman with a gentleness that suggested he had been doing it for 50 years. The woman was small and frail, clutching a worn handbag tight against her chest as if it contained something very precious. They were dressed neatly, the man in a suit that looked like it was tailored decades ago, the woman in a simple skirt and cardigan, but they looked out of place among the younger, trendier crowd. They had a look about them that Keanu recognized immediately, the look of people who were trying very hard to maintain their dignity in a world that was moving too fast for them. The waiter, a young guy with a trendy haircut and a hurried attitude, sat them at a small table near Keanu's booth. Keanu watched them closely. They didn't look at the menu with excitement, they looked at it with anxiety. The old man put on his glasses, his hands shaking slightly, and squinted at the prices in the dim light. Keanu saw the woman lean in and whisper something to her husband, shaking her head sadly. The man sighed, patted her hand, and then signaled the waiter. When the young waiter came over, his pen was poised and ready. The couple ordered carefully. No appetizers. No drinks. Just water. And then they ordered the cheapest pasta dish on the menu to share. Keanu felt a tightness in his chest. He knew that look. He knew the feeling of not having enough money, though his life was very different now. He remembered times in his past when things were tough, and he had to count every penny. Seeing these two people, clearly at the end of their lives, having to worry about the cost of a meal struck a deep chord in him. Their food arrived, and they ate slowly. They didn't talk much. They just took small bites, savoring the flavor, treating the simple meal like it was a feast. They held hands across the table when they weren't eating. There was a heaviness around them, a kind of sadness that went beyond just being hungry or poor. It looked like grief. It looked like they were saying goodbye to something, or maybe everything. Keanu ate his own meal, but his appetite wasn't really there anymore. He couldn't stop looking at them. He saw the woman wipe a tear from her eye quickly, hoping her husband wouldn't notice. The man saw it, though. He reached across and wiped her cheek with his thumb, his face full of a love that was heartbreaking to witness. Keanu wondered what their story was. Had they lost someone? Were they sick? He felt a strong urge to go over there, to sit with them, to tell them that everything would be okay, but he knew he couldn't. That would be intrusive. He was just a stranger in a corner booth. Then, the moment came that changed everything. The waiter dropped the small black check folder onto the table. The old man reached for it with the same hesitation he had shown the menu. He opened it, stared at the numbers for a long time, and then began to pull a worn-out leather wallet from his inside pocket. Keanu watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the man opened the wallet. It was empty except for a few old photographs and a small handful of coins. The man began to count the coins onto the table. Quarters, dimes, a few crumpled dollar bills. He counted them once, his fingers fumbling. Then he counted them again. The woman watched him, her eyes wide with panic. She opened her purse and pulled out a small coin purse, dumping it out. It added almost nothing to the pile. The waiter was standing by the side, tapping his foot, checking his watch. The restaurant was busy, and he wanted the table. Keanu saw the old man's face turn a deep shade of red. The humiliation was washing over him. He looked at his wife, and she looked away, tears now streaming freely down her face. He started to gather the coins back up, presumably to tell the waiter they couldn't pay, that they would have to leave, that they would have to do the walk of shame past all the happy, eating people. It was a terrible moment. It was the kind of moment that makes you feel small and invisible. Keanu didn't think about it. He didn't weigh the pros and cons. He didn't worry about someone noticing him and pulling out a phone. He just acted. He stood up from his booth, catching the waiter's eye. He raised his hand slightly and gestured for the young man to come over. The waiter looked annoyed at first, thinking Keanu was complaining about the service, but when he got to the booth, Keanu spoke in a low, calm voice. "Put their bill on my card," Keanu said, sliding his credit card across the table. "And tell them it's already taken care of. But do not tell them who paid. Please. Make sure they know it's covered, but keep me out of it." The waiter looked at the card, then at Keanu, then over at the elderly couple. His annoyed expression softened. He realized what was happening. He nodded, taking the card. "Got it, sir. Thank you." Keanu watched as the waiter went back to the table. The old man was just about to stand up, his mouth opening to stammer out an apology. The waiter leaned in, said something quietly, and gently took the folder away, placing the credit card slip face down. The old man looked confused. He looked at the waiter, then at his wife. The waiter pointed to the kitchen and smiled, saying something else. Keanu saw the old man slump back in his chair, relief washing over him so powerfully it looked like he might collapse. The woman covered her mouth with her hands, her shoulders shaking as she wept, not from sadness this time, but from gratitude. They looked around the restaurant, trying to catch the eye of the person who had saved them from that moment of shame. They looked at the students, they looked at the couple on the date. But Keanu was already moving. He had put enough cash on the table to cover his own meal and a massive tip for the waiter. He pulled his hood up, keeping his head down. He walked past their table, close enough to hear the old man whisper, "God bless whoever did that." Keanu pushed open the door and stepped back out into the cold rain. He felt good. He felt warm inside, despite the weather. He thought that was the end of it. He thought he had just done a good deed for a couple of strangers who were having a hard time, and that tomorrow, he would go back to work and forget about it. He had no idea that the universe was not done with this story yet. He had no idea that this small act of kindness was about to collide with his reality in a way that would shake him to his core. As he walked down the street, hailing a cab, he felt a sense of peace, completely unaware that the next day would bring a shock he never saw coming. The heavy wooden door of the restaurant closed behind Keanu, shutting out the warmth and the smell of garlic, but the feeling in his chest remained light. He stepped back into the cold, pouring rain, pulling his hood tighter. The water instantly soaked into his shoes, but he didn't mind. He felt a quiet sense of rightness. Back inside, that elderly couple was finishing their meal. They weren't leaving in shame. They weren't counting pennies on the table while a waiter tapped his foot. They were just two people having dinner, with dignity. Keanu walked to the corner and hailed a yellow taxi. As he slid into the back seat, dripping wet, he thought about them. He wondered where they lived. He wondered if they had children who didn't visit, or if they were all alone in the city. It was a sad thought, but he pushed it away. He couldn't save everyone, and he couldn't fix the world, but tonight, he had fixed a small piece of it for two people. That was enough. Inside the bistro, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The heavy cloud of anxiety that had hung over the corner table had vanished. The old man, Arthur, sat back in his chair, his shoulders dropping 3 inches as the tension left his body. He looked at his wife, Martha, across the table. Her eyes were still red and puffy from crying, but now there was a softness there, a look of disbelief. "Did you hear him?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling slightly. "He said it's taken care of." "All of it?" Martha nodded, dabbing her eyes with a paper napkin. "I heard him, Arthur." "But who would do that?" Arthur looked around the restaurant again, scanning the faces. The students were still laughing. The young couple was still holding hands. The waiter was clearing a table nearby. None of them looked like they had just paid a stranger's bill. "I don't know," Arthur whispered, shaking his head. "Maybe it was someone who knew us, someone from the old neighborhood." "Maybe," Martha said softly, though she didn't believe it. They hadn't lived in their old neighborhood for years, and most of their friends were gone or had moved away. "Or maybe," she added, her voice gaining a bit of wonder, "it was just a good person. An angel." The waiter returned with the credit card slip face down, so they couldn't see the name on it, just as Keanu had instructed. He placed it gently on the table. "Everything is settled, folks," the waiter said, his tone much kinder now. He felt a bit guilty about his impatience earlier. "You take your time. There's no rush." Arthur reached out and squeezed Martha's hand. "We can finish our water," he said, a small smile forming on his face. It was the first smile he had worn all night. They sat there for another 20 minutes, just holding hands and listening to the rain beat against the glass window. They didn't say much, but they didn't need to. The silence wasn't filled with worry anymore. It was filled with peace. They finished their water, gathered their coats, and stood up to leave. "Thank you," Arthur said to the waiter, pressing his hand to his chest. "Thank you for your help." "You're welcome," the waiter replied. "Have a good night." They walked out into the rain, but it didn't feel as cold as it had before. Arthur held the umbrella over Martha, shielding her from the downpour as they walked slowly toward the subway station. They didn't have money for a taxi, but the walk didn't feel long. Their steps were lighter. When they finally arrived at their small apartment in Queens, the air inside was stale and cold. The radiator was clanking in the corner, struggling to heat the place. It was a humble home, filled with faded photographs and furniture that had seen better decades. Usually, coming home was the hardest part of the day. It was where the silence was the loudest, and where the worries about bills and medicine sat waiting for them like unwelcome guests. But tonight was different. Arthur hung up his wet coat and helped Martha with hers. "Tea?" he asked. "Yes, please," she said. They moved around the tiny kitchen in a dance they had perfected over 50 years of marriage. Arthur put the kettle on, and Martha took out 2 mugs. As they waited for the water to boil, Arthur leaned against the counter. "That meal," he said quietly. "That was the best meal we've had in a long time." "It was," Martha agreed. "But Arthur, the money we didn't spend. That was our emergency fund for next week." Arthur looked down at his shoes. "I know. But we have to have faith, Martha. Someone out there saw us. They didn't turn away. They helped us. That means something. It means we aren't invisible." Martha walked over and put her arms around his waist, resting her head on his chest. "I felt so ashamed when I realized we didn't have enough," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I felt like we had failed." "You didn't fail," Arthur said, stroking her gray hair. "We're just tired. But tonight, that stranger gave us back a little bit of our pride. And I am not going to let that go to waste." They drank their tea in the living room, sitting under a knitted blanket. They talked about the meal, the sauce, the bread. They replayed the moment the waiter told them the bill was paid. They wondered who the man was. They described the other diners, trying to guess which one had been their benefactor. They went to bed that night with full hearts, the despair that usually gripped them kept at bay by the memory of a simple, unseen kindness. Meanwhile, across the city in a high-rise hotel, Keanu was getting ready for bed. He was tired. The day on set had been long, and the emotions of the evening had added another layer of exhaustion. He brushed his teeth and looked at himself in the mirror. The face looking back was older now, lines forming around the eyes. He had lived a lot of life. He had known deep pain and loss. He knew what it felt like to be alone in a crowded room. He climbed into bed and turned off the lamp. The city lights filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. He thought about the old couple again. He hoped they got home safe. He hoped they slept well. He didn't expect anything to come of it. In his experience, these moments were just moments, beautiful, fleeting, and gone by morning. He drifted off to sleep thinking that the story was over. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds over New York. It was going to be a clear, crisp day. Keanu woke up early, as was his habit. He drank black coffee, looked over his script for the day, and then headed out to the Brooklyn set. The movie he was filming was a big action blockbuster, full of explosions and car chases, but Keanu preferred the quiet moments between the takes. When he arrived on set, it was a hive of activity. Trucks were everywhere, cables snaked across the pavement like black snakes, and crew members were rushing around with headsets and clipboards. "Good morning, Mr. Reeves?" called out the production assistant as Keanu stepped out of his car. "Morning," Keanu replied with a nod and a small smile. He was immediately swept into hair and makeup, then into wardrobe. He put on the costume of the character he was playing, a tough, rugged man who didn't need anyone. It was ironic, considering how Keanu felt in real life. They were filming a scene in an alleyway. Cameras were set up on cranes, and huge lights were positioned to bounce sunlight off reflectors. Keanu got into position. The director called action. And Keanu transformed. He delivered his lines with intensity, running through the scene with focus and precision. But between takes, while the crew reset the lights, he found himself drifting back to the restaurant. He wondered if the old man was walking okay in the rain. He hoped they weren't sick. Around midday, they broke for lunch. The craft services table was set up with salads, sandwiches, and hot food. Keanu usually grabbed a quick bite and sat by himself to go over lines, or sometimes he joined the crew for a joke. Today, he was sitting on a crate in the shade of a building, eating a chicken sandwich, when he noticed a commotion near the main gate of the set. The security guards were standing in front of a man and a woman. The guards were large, with their arms crossed, looking imposing. The couple was small and elderly. Keanu froze. He recognized the coat. He recognized the way the man stood, slightly stooped, holding onto the woman's arm. Keanu stood up, wiping his mouth with a napkin. He squinted against the sunlight. Was it really them? It seemed impossible. He hadn't told them his name. He hadn't told them where he was filming. How could they find him, and why would two elderly people trek all the way to a movie set in Brooklyn? One of the security guards looked over at Keanu and waved him over. "Mr. Reeves, sorry to bother you, sir. But these folks, they are insisting they know you. They say they have to speak to you. They won't leave." Keanu felt a strange mix of confusion and curiosity. He walked over, his boots crunching on the gravel. As he got closer, he saw their faces more clearly. It was definitely them. They looked nervous, standing there in the midst of the Hollywood chaos. They looked tiny against the backdrop of trailers and equipment. Keanu waved the guards down. "It's okay," he said softly. "I know them. Well, I met them last night." The guards stepped back, looking surprised. Keanu walked up to the couple. Up close, he could see the age in their skin, the fragility in their bones. The old man looked up at him, his eyes searching Keanu's face. Then, recognition dawned on him. "You," the old man breathed. "It was you." Keanu smiled gently, putting his hands in his pockets. He didn't want to make a scene. "Hi," he said simply. "How are you guys doing? Did you get home okay last night?" The old woman, Martha, reached out and took Keanu's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "We did," she said, her voice shaking. "But we had to find you. We asked the restaurant, and they wouldn't tell us anything. But we saw a picture in the paper this morning about the movie filming here. We took the subway. We had to come." Keanu looked at them, genuinely confused. "You took the subway all the way out here? That's a long trip. Is everything all right? Was there a problem with the bill?" Arthur shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes again. "No, no problem with the bill," he choked out. "The problem was, us. The problem was what we were going to do before you paid." Keanu tilted his head, frowning slightly. He didn't understand. He looked from the old man to the old woman. The set was buzzing with noise around them, people shouting, radios crackling, generators humming, but in this small circle, it was dead silent. He could feel that something heavy was coming. Something much heavier than a free dinner. What do you mean? Keanu asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. What were you going to do? Martha squeezed his hand tighter, looking up at him with eyes full of gratitude and pain. You didn't just buy us dinner, son, she said. You bought us time. You bought us hope. Keanu waited, his heart beginning to beat faster. He had a feeling his life was about to change, or at least, his understanding of it was. The noise of the movie set suddenly felt very loud, like a chaotic storm that didn't belong in this moment. Keanu looked at the elderly couple standing before him. Their clothes were slightly rumpled from the long subway ride, and their faces were etched with a mixture of exhaustion and intense emotion. He could see that they were struggling to find the right words that were heavy and hard to say. He realized immediately that standing in the middle of a busy movie set, with people staring and cameras rolling nearby, was not the place for this conversation. Come with me, Keanu said gently, his voice low and calm. He turned to the security guards who were still hovering nearby, looking curious. Give us a minute, okay? Take them to my trailer. The guards nodded and led the way, parting the sea of crew members like the Red Sea. Keanu walked behind Arthur and Martha, watching them shuffle carefully over the cables and uneven ground. He felt a strange sense of protectiveness. These two people were so fragile, so out of place in this world of shiny trucks and expensive equipment. They belonged in a quiet living room, sitting in armchairs, not navigating a Hollywood action set. They reached his trailer, a large, luxury bus that served as his private sanctuary during the filming. Keanu opened the door and helped Martha climb the steep steps. Arthur followed, holding onto the rail with a white-knuckled grip. Inside, it was quiet and cool, a stark contrast to the heat and noise outside. Keanu motioned for them to sit on the small leather sofa. He sat opposite them in a chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, ready to listen. Can I get you some water? Keanu asked. Or maybe coffee, it's fresh. Just water, please, Arthur said. His voice was raspy, dry from the travel and the emotion. Keanu filled 3 paper cups from a dispenser and handed them to the couple. He watched as Arthur's hands shook again, just like they had in the restaurant, as he lifted the cup to his lips. It wasn't just old age, Keanu realized. It was something more. It was a tremor that came from deep inside. Martha took a sip and set her cup down on the table. She looked at Keanu with eyes that were swimming in tears. We didn't come to bother you, she started, her voice trembling. We know you are a busy man. We know you are important. But when we found out it was you, we had to come. We had to tell you why last night meant so much. Keanu shook his head softly. You don't have to explain. I just wanted to help. I saw you were worried about the bill. Arthur let out a short, sad chuckle. The bill, he said, looking down at the floor. We weren't worried about the bill, son. We were worried about everything. He took a deep breath and looked up, locking eyes with Keanu. I am dying. The words hung in the air of the trailer, heavy and final. Keanu didn't look away. He didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly, his face open and encouraging. I'm so sorry, he said quietly. The doctors say there is nothing more they can do, Arthur continued. It's just a matter of time now. A few months, maybe less. He paused, coughing into his fist. It was a wet, rattling sound that made Martha rub his back automatically. We've spent everything we have. Every penny from our savings, every bit of insurance, trying to fix me. We sold the house. We sold the car. We have nothing left. We live in a small room now, just trying to get through each day. Martha picked up the story, her voice flowing like a river of sorrow. We decided yesterday that we couldn't do it anymore. Not just the sickness, but the poverty. The indignity of it all. We are tired, Mr. Reeves. We are just so tired. Keanu felt a chill run down his spine. He had a terrible feeling he knew where this was going, but he let them keep talking. He owed them that. We looked at our money yesterday morning, Martha said, wiping a tear from her cheek. We had enough left for one nice meal. Just one. We decided to go to that restaurant. We put on our best clothes. We went there to say goodbye to the world. Arthur reached over and took his wife's hand. We had a plan, he said, his voice cracking. We weren't going home after dinner. We were going to the river. We were going to end it together. We didn't want to be a burden anymore. We didn't want to slowly starve or freeze in the winter. We wanted to go out with a full stomach and a nice memory, holding hands. Keanu stopped breathing for a second. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The meal he had watched them eat, the meal he had paid for, it wasn't just dinner. It was supposed to be their last supper. The anxiety he saw on their faces wasn't about the check, it was about the end of their lives. The coins they were counting weren't just for food, they were the last remnants of their existence. We ordered the food, Arthur whispered. And then the bill came. And I couldn't even pay for that one last thing. I felt like such a failure. I couldn't provide for my wife even one last time. He looked at Keanu, his eyes intense. And then you stepped in. You paid for it? You didn't know us. You didn't know we had nothing to offer you in return. You saw us. We sat there for a long time after you left, Martha added. We looked at the empty plates. We looked at the receipt that said paid. We realized something. If a stranger, a famous man with his own life and problems, could care enough to help us, maybe the world wasn't as empty as we thought. Maybe we weren't as invisible as we felt. Arthur nodded. We walked home in the rain, but we didn't go to the river. We went to our apartment. We made tea. We talked about you. We talked about how maybe there was still a little bit of magic left in the world. You didn't just buy us pasta, Mr. Reeves. You bought us back our lives. You gave us a reason to wake up today. Keanu sat back in his chair, stunned into silence. He looked at his hands, then back at them. He had done many things in his life. He had made movies that millions of people had seen. He had donated millions of dollars to charities. He had experienced incredible highs and crushing lows. But he had never, in his entire life, been told that he had stopped someone from ending their life just by paying a dinner tab. It was too much to process. He felt a lump forming in his throat, making it hard to speak. He looked at Arthur, a man who was ready to die but was now sitting here, alive and present. He looked at Martha, who had been ready to leave the world but was now holding her husband's hand with hope. Keanu started, then stopped. He cleared his throat. I had no idea. I saw you counting the change. I saw how much you cared about each other. I just wanted to help. You did more than help, Arthur said firmly. You saved us. And we came here today not just to say thank you. We came because we don't know what to do next. We have no money. We have no family. We have each other, and now we have this second chance that you gave us, but we don't know how to use it. Keanu looked at them. He saw the fear in their eyes. The fear that the relief they felt last night was temporary, and that the darkness was waiting just outside the door to swallow them up again. He realized that the story didn't end with the check. The check was just the beginning. He stood up and walked over to the small refrigerator in the corner of the trailer. He took out a bottle of water for himself, needing something to do with his hands. He needed a moment to think. He wasn't a savior. He was just a guy who played heroes in movies. But here, in the quiet of his trailer, reality was more dramatic than any script he had ever read. "You're right," Keanu said, turning back to face them. "The world is still hard. It's still going to be hard. But you're here. You're still here." He walked over and sat on the edge of the coffee table in front of them, bringing himself down to their eye level. "I can't fix the sickness. I wish I could. I really do. But we can figure out the rest. We don't let it end like this. Not now. Not after last night." Martha began to weep again, but this time it was a different kind of crying. It wasn't the weeping of despair, it was the weeping of release. She had been carrying the weight of their decision to die all night and all morning, and now she could finally put it down. Arthur looked at Keanu with a gaze of pure gratitude. "We don't want charity," he said, his voice regaining a bit of strength. "We just want to live what time we have left with dignity." "Dignity," Keanu repeated. "That's something everyone deserves." He realized then that this was why he was in New York. Maybe it wasn't just for the movie. Maybe the universe had put him in that restaurant, at that specific time, for this exact moment. He felt a sense of responsibility, but not in a burdensome way. He felt a connection. He looked out the window of the trailer at the bustling crew outside. They were worrying about lighting and camera angles and schedules. It all seemed so trivial now. Inside this small space, life and death were being discussed. Real life. Keanu leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "Okay," he said, his voice steady and strong. "Let's make a plan. We don't worry about today. You're here with me. We'll get some lunch. We'll talk. But I want you to know something. You didn't come all this way for nothing. You're not invisible anymore. I see you." Arthur and Martha looked at each other, and for the first time in a long time, they saw a future. It was a short future, maybe, but it was a future. They saw afternoons spent sitting in the park, maybe feeding pigeons. They saw evenings watching television together. They saw holding hands until the very end, without fear. And it was all because a stranger in a leather jacket had paid for their dinner. Keanu stood up again. "I have to go back to work soon," he said. "But I'm not leaving you guys stranded. We're going to make some calls. But first, are you hungry? Because I know a place around here that makes great sandwiches, and my treat." Arthur let out a laugh, a real, genuine laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I think we could eat," he said. "Good," Keanu smiled. "Me too." The heavy atmosphere in the trailer lifted, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. The tragedy had been averted, but the challenge remained. Keanu knew that writing a check wasn't going to solve the long-term problem, but he also knew that he couldn't turn his back on them. He had stepped into their story, and now he was a part of it. And as he looked at the two elderly people sitting on his couch, he knew that his life was richer for it. He wasn't just an actor playing a role. He was a human being, connecting with other humans, and that was the most important role of all. The air inside the trailer felt heavy, but in a different way now. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating weight of sadness or shame that had hung over the couple the night before. It was the heavy, sacred weight of a secret shared and a life saved. Keanu sat on the edge of the coffee table, looking at Arthur and Martha. He could see the fatigue in their eyes, the kind of tiredness that sleep doesn't fix. It was a deep-down bone weariness that comes from fighting a battle you know you can't win. Arthur coughed, a dry, hacking sound that made his whole body shake. Martha reached out without thinking, rubbing his back in slow, rhythmic circles. It was a move so practiced, so automatic, that it showed just how many years they had spent caring for each other. Keanu watched this small interaction and felt a lump form in his throat. He had lost people he loved. He knew the pain of absence. But looking at them, he saw the pain of presence, the difficult, heartbreaking job of loving someone who is leaving. "We should eat that sandwich," Keanu said softly, breaking the silence. He stood up and offered a hand to Arthur. "Come on. Let's get some fresh air." Arthur grasped Keanu's hand. His grip was weak, his skin paper-thin and spotted with age. Keanu pulled him up gently, making sure the old man was steady before letting go. Martha stood up as well, smoothing down her skirt. She looked nervous about going back outside. "Will people be staring?" she asked quietly. Keanu smiled, a warm, reassuring smile that reached his eyes. "Let them stare," he said. "They're just curious. But don't worry about them. Today, you're the VIPs." He led them out of the trailer and down the steps. The moment they hit the ground, the energy of the set shifted. Heads turned. The crew members, people who were used to seeing celebrities, explosions, and high-stakes dramas, stopped what they were doing to watch the movie star walk with two elderly strangers. Keanu didn't wave or acknowledge the looks. He simply walked beside them, matching his slow pace to Arthur's shuffling steps. He took them to a quiet corner of the set, away from the cameras and cables. There were a few folding chairs set up under a large umbrella. Keanu motioned for them to sit, and then he went to the craft services table. He came back with 3 wrapped sandwiches, 3 bottles of water, and a small pile of chocolate chip cookies. "I don't know about you, but I love these cookies," Keanu said as he sat down on an upturned crate next to them. "They remind me of being a kid." Arthur unwrapped his sandwich. It was a simple turkey and cheese on rye. He took a small bite and chewed slowly. For a moment, nobody spoke. They just ate, enjoying the quiet and the shade. The city noise seemed far away, blocked by the tall buildings surrounding the set. "This is good," Arthur said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Much better than the tea and toast we had this morning." Martha nodded, but she was looking at Keanu. She was studying his face, trying to understand him. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We told you our story. You listened. That was enough. You don't need to feed us, too." Keanu stopped chewing. He swallowed and looked at her. "I want to," he said simply. "And honestly, I needed this break. Sometimes, being on a movie set feels fake. Like we're pretending to be people. Sitting here with you guys feels real. It feels like the most real thing I've done in weeks." Arthur laughed, a short, rusty sound. "Real life is overrated, son. Trust me." "Maybe," Keanu replied. "But it's all we've got. And you two almost gave it up yesterday." The laughter faded, replaced by a somber mood. Arthur put his sandwich down in his lap. He looked out at the movie set, at the fake storefronts and the painted pavement. "We didn't want to die," Arthur said, his voice low and intense. I hope you understand that. We loved life. We loved each other. But when you run out of money, and the doctors say there's no hope, and you're living in a room with cockroaches, you start to feel like a burden. You feel like the world is waiting for you to disappear so it can move on. Keanu leaned forward. You are not a burden. Every life has value. Every story matters. Martha reached out and touched Keanu's arm. That's easy for a young man to say. A rich man. But when you are old and broken, it is hard to feel valuable. Keanu looked at her hand on his arm. He thought about his own life. He thought about the darkness he had walked through when he lost his daughter and later his partner. He remembered the nights when he felt like the world would be better off without him. He knew that feeling of worthlessness. It didn't care how much money you had. It was a sickness of the soul. I've known sadness, Keanu said slowly. I've lost things I thought I couldn't live without. There were times I felt like giving up, too. But I learned something. You don't have to be strong all the time. You just have to keep going. Even if it's just one step. Or one bite of a sandwich. Arthur looked at Keanu with new eyes. He saw past the movie star facade. He saw a fellow traveler who had walked through the dark valleys and come out the other side. You're a good man, Arthur said. I saw you in movies. You always play the hero. But I think you play the hero because you are one. Keanu shook his head, embarrassed. No. I'm just a guy who happened to be in the right restaurant at the right time. It wasn't luck, Martha said firmly. It was fate. God sent you to that window seat. Keanu didn't argue with her. He wasn't sure if he believed in fate or God, but he knew that the odds of them meeting were incredibly small. And he knew that he couldn't just walk away now that he knew the truth. He had stepped into their stream, and he had to help them swim. He finished his sandwich and crumpled the wrapper. He looked at his watch. He had to go back to filming soon. The director would be looking for him. But he couldn't leave them in the same desperate situation they were in yesterday. A sandwich and a kind conversation were nice, but they didn't pay for medicine or rent. Arthur, Martha, Keanu said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. I want to help you. Not just with lunch. I want to help you figure out the next few months. Arthur stiffened. We don't want charity. We told you. It's not charity, Keanu said. Think of it as an investment. I invested in a good feeling last night when I paid for your dinner. I want to keep that feeling going. Let me help you find a better place to stay. A place with an elevator so you don't have to climb stairs. Let me make sure you have enough food and that your medical bills are covered. The couple looked at each other. They were proud people. They had worked hard all their lives. Accepting help was difficult. But they were also realists. They were out of options. We can't pay you back, Arthur said, his voice breaking. I don't want you to pay me back, Keanu said. Just promise me you won't go to the river. Promise me you'll keep fighting. That's the only payment I need. Martha began to cry, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. She nodded vigorously. I promise, she whispered. I promise we won't give up. Arthur nodded too. I promise. As long as I have breath, I will keep going for her. Keanu let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Good. That's good. He stood up and pulled his phone out of his pocket. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number for his personal assistant. He stepped away a few feet to make the call, speaking in a low voice. He didn't want them to hear the details, to feel like they were being managed. He wanted it to feel like magic. When he came back, he was smiling. "Okay," he said. "I have a friend who is going to come pick you up in a nice car. No subway today. She's going to take you to a hotel for a few nights somewhere comfortable with room service and big beds. Then, we're going to look at some assisted living facilities. Not a nursing home, but a place where you can get help and still be together." Arthur looked overwhelmed. "A hotel like the ones in the movies?" "Even better," Keanu grinned. "They have those tiny little shampoos and everything." Martha laughed through her tears. "I haven't stayed in a hotel since our honeymoon." "Well," Keanu said, "it's time for a second honeymoon, then." A production assistant came running over. "Keanu, they need you on set." "Like, right now?" Keanu nodded. "I'm coming." He turned back to the couple. He crouched down one last time, looking them in the eye. "My car will take you wherever you need to go after the hotel. I'll have my phone with me. If you need anything, you call. No matter what time it is." Arthur reached out and grabbed Keanu's hand in both of his. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave us back our lives." Keanu squeezed the old man's hands. "You gave me a reminder of what matters." He stood up and walked toward the set, putting his game face back on. He had to go be a hero again. But as he walked away, he knew that the real hero work wasn't happening in front of the camera. It was happening on two folding chairs under an umbrella, where an old couple was finishing their sandwiches and looking forward to tomorrow for the first time in a long time. As Keanu stepped into the bright lights and the noise of the movie set, he felt different. The lines of the script in his hands seemed less important. The explosions seemed less exciting. All he could think about was the quiet dignity of Arthur and Martha. He channeled that feeling into his acting, finding a depth of emotion that surprised the director. An hour later, a sleek black car pulled up to the gate. The driver recognized the couple and opened the door with a smile. Arthur and Martha climbed in, sinking into the soft leather seats. They looked out the window as the car pulled away from the curb. They saw Keanu in the distance, running through an alleyway with a prop gun in his hand. "Look at him," Arthur whispered, watching the actor work. "He's running around saving the world in the movies." Martha took her husband's hand and held it tight as the car merged onto the busy street. "No, Arthur," she said softly. "He already saved the world. He saved our world." They drove away from the set, leaving the chaos of the movie behind them, heading toward a future that, just yesterday, they thought didn't exist. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the city. It was a beautiful evening, full of promise. And for the first time in a long time, they weren't afraid of the night. The sleek black car glided through the streets of New York City, smooth and silent, a stark contrast to the jerky, noisy subway train that Arthur and Martha were used to. Inside the cabin, it was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy silence of their small apartment. It was a peaceful silence. Arthur sat with his eyes closed, his head resting against the soft leather, while Martha watched the city blur past the tinted window. The skyscrapers, usually looming over them like indifferent giants, seemed to sparkle with a new light. When the car pulled up to the hotel, Martha let out a small gasp. It was a beautiful building, old and elegant, with a red carpet extending out the front and doormen standing tall in their uniforms. Arthur opened his eyes and looked at the entrance. "Are you sure this is right?" he asked, his voice filled with doubt. This looks like a place for kings and presidents, not for us. Before Martha could answer, a driver was opening the door. He didn't rush them. He stood there with a patient smile, offering a hand to help Arthur out. Another doorman took Martha's arm gently. They walked into the lobby, and Martha felt like she had stepped into a movie. The floor was polished marble, and there were fresh flowers everywhere. The air smelled like vanilla and expensive perfume. They walked to the reception desk. The woman behind the counter smiled warmly. "Welcome. We have been expecting you. Everything is ready." She handed them a key card without asking for a credit card or ID. Keanu had taken care of it all. They took the elevator up to a high floor. When Arthur slid the key into the door and it clicked open, they walked into a suite that was bigger than their entire apartment back in Queens. There was a living room with a plush couch, a giant TV, and a dining table. Through a set of double doors, they could see a huge bed with white linens that looked like clouds. But the best part was the window. It spanned the whole wall, offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline and the park below. "Arthur," Martha whispered, walking over to the window. "Look at this." Arthur shuffled over and stood beside her. He didn't say anything. He just squeezed her hand. They stood there for a long time, watching the tiny cars and people moving far below. For years, they had felt invisible, buried under the weight of poverty and sickness. But up here, above the noise, they felt like they were part of the world again. That evening, they ordered room service. They didn't look at the prices on the menu. They ordered steak and vegetables, chocolate cake, and hot tea. When the food arrived on a rolling cart, they sat at the small table by the window and ate. They ate slowly, savoring every bite. They laughed about the way the waiter had folded the napkins into swans. For the first time in a long time, the shadow of death wasn't sitting at the table with them. Meanwhile, Keanu had finished his work on the movie set. The director had called wrap, and the crew was beginning to pack up. Keanu was tired, his body aching from the stunts he had performed that day, but his mind was sharp. He couldn't go home and just sleep. He needed to know that Arthur and Martha were okay. He took a shower in his trailer to wash off the dirt and sweat from the set, changed into fresh clothes, and drove to the hotel. He didn't want to make a big scene, so he came in through a side entrance. He took the elevator up to their floor and knocked softly on the door. Martha opened it. When she saw him, her face lit up. "Keanu!" she exclaimed. "You came." "I said I would," he said, smiling. He was holding a small bag of pastries from a famous bakery nearby. "I brought dessert. Just in case the chocolate cake wasn't enough." Arthur stood up from the couch, looking stronger than he had earlier. "You didn't have to do this," he said, but there was a smile on his face too. They sat in the living room of the suite and talked for hours. They didn't talk about movies or celebrities. They talked about life. Arthur told stories about when he was a young man, working in a factory and meeting Martha at a dance hall. Martha talked about the years they spent raising their children, and the quiet sadness of the house after the kids grew up and moved away. Keanu listened. He really listened. He asked questions. He laughed at their jokes. At one point, the conversation turned to the future. Keanu leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "Listen," he said. "This hotel is great for a few days. A honeymoon, like we said. But we need to think about what comes next. You need a place where you don't have to worry about stairs. Where there are nurses who can help. Where Arthur can be comfortable. Martha looked down at her hands. We can't afford a place like that, Keanu. Those places cost a fortune. I know, Keanu said softly. But I have some friends. I made some calls while I was driving over. There is a facility not far from here. It's beautiful. It has a garden. They have the best doctors. And I've taken care of the finances. You don't have to worry about the money. Ever. Arthur looked at Keanu, his eyes wide. Why are you doing all this for us? We are strangers. Keanu looked out the window at the city lights, thinking for a moment. Because I know what it feels like to lose everything, he said quietly. And I know what it feels like to think you're alone. You aren't alone. Not anymore. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of paper with a phone number written on it. This is my personal cell number. If you need anything, if you have a question, or if you just want to talk, you call me. I mean it. Martha took the paper and held it against her chest like it was a precious jewel. Thank you, she whispered. You are an angel. No, Keanu shook his head. I'm just a guy who had a really good dinner last night. Over the next few weeks, Keanu became a regular part of their lives. He visited them at the care home he had found for them. He didn't come with cameras or reporters. He came alone, sometimes bringing a book, sometimes bringing a basket of fruit. He would sit with Arthur in the garden while Martha knitted nearby. They watched Arthur's health decline, but it was different now. He wasn't in pain. He wasn't worried about Martha starving if he was gone. He was at peace. He knew Martha would be safe. He knew she would be taken care of. One afternoon, about a month later, Keanu sat by Arthur's bedside. The old man was weaker now, sleeping most of the time. But he opened his eyes when Keanu walked in. Hey, Keanu said softly, taking the old man's hand. Hey, son, Arthur whispered. His voice was faint, like the wind blowing through dry leaves. How are you feeling? Keanu asked. I'm okay, Arthur said. I'm ready. Keanu felt a pinch in his heart. He squeezed Arthur's hand. You don't have to be brave, Arthur. It's okay to be scared. I'm not scared, Arthur said. He looked toward the door, where Martha was sitting in the hallway reading a magazine. I'm not scared because I know she is going to be okay, because of you. Arthur paused, taking a shallow breath. You know, that night at the restaurant, we were going to end it. We were so tired. But you gave us a reason to stay. You gave us these last few weeks. We laughed. We ate good food. We lived. That is a gift you can't put a price on. Tears welled up in Keanu's eyes. He didn't try to hide them. I'm glad I was there, Arthur. I'm really glad. You were there, Arthur said. And when I go, I want you to know. I go happy. I go knowing that the world has good people in it. People like you. Arthur closed his eyes then, a small smile still on his lips. Keanu sat there for a long time, just holding the old man's hand, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. It was a quiet moment, private and sacred. No cameras were rolling. No audience was clapping. It was just a human being saying goodbye to a friend. Arthur passed away peacefully 2 days later. It was a Tuesday morning, sunny and clear, just like the day Keanu had met them on the movie set. There was no pain, no panic. He just slipped away while holding Martha's hand. The funeral was small, just Martha and a few staff members from the home. But Keanu was there, 2. He stood at the back, wearing a black suit and sunglasses, letting Martha have her moment of grief without feeling crowded. Afterwards, he drove her to the park. They sat on a bench and fed the pigeons, just as Keanu had predicted they would do. "He's not suffering anymore," Martha said, watching the birds peck at the crumbs. "And I'm not afraid." "You are strong, Martha," Keanu said. "You always were." "I have a new home," she said. "I have good food. I have my knitting. And I have your number in my pocket." She patted the pocket of her coat. "I am not alone." Keanu smiled and put his arm around her shoulders, giving her a gentle side hug. "You are never alone." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grass, Keanu thought about the strange and wonderful path that had brought them together. He had started out just wanting a plate of pasta. He ended up saving 2 lives, and in the process, they had saved him right back. They reminded him that no matter how dark things get, a single act of kindness can light up the world. They reminded him that everyone has a story, and everyone deserves to be heard. He walked Martha back to her new home at the care facility. He promised to visit again next week. And as he walked out into the cool evening air, he didn't feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. He felt light. He felt hopeful. He knew that Arthur was up there somewhere, looking down and smiling, probably enjoying a heavenly dinner that didn't cost a cent. And Keanu knew that whenever he felt lonely, he could look back on this time and remember the elderly couple who taught him what it really meant to be alive.